All right, well, welcome to this is the last Life on Tap of the semester. The purpose of these events, for those who haven't been here, is twofold. The first is, of course, to give you an insights into the varied and vast careers of our alumni. We have a lot of alumni doing a lot of different things. Many of you current students are not aware of many of the great things that our alumni do, so this gives you an opportunity for that. It also gives you an opportunity to meet the alumni who come back to campus for these Life on Taps. They are come here on their own will. Every time we ask alumni to speak, they're always like, yes, please, I can't wait to speak. So hopefully someday when you go out there and do whatever you do, we'll be happy to have you come back and stand in front of the students and give your sort of testimony about what you did and how you succeeded. Since you arrived here on campus, many of you are freshmen here, but we talk about this in ELP and elsewhere. We tell you that you can do pretty much anything you want to do with a liberal arts degree. And it is true. And it's the point of this thing is to then say, well, I need to have some experience, some examples of what people do in these careers. And so that's why we have the Life on Tap, to come back to give you some examples. Our alumni are very helpful to the students, and they're very helpful to the college. And so we have a very vast alumni network who are willing to be mentors to you folks, to say, yeah, I don't have any idea what I want to do. Who can I talk to? Well, the alumni are very helpful for that. And as a result, they very much want to help you succeed and give you the confidence you need to do well in life. Tonight we have two alumni who are, it's funny from my point of view, I always think of them, they just graduated 2 years ago or so, but they've graduated at different times, a lot further than 2 years ago. We have Francis All and Matt Akers, who are here to speak about the life of a lawyer. That'll be Matt Akers, and sort of the law school and what to expect in law school. So to begin, let me introduce Francis. I'm going to introduce both of them at the same time. The plan is going to be for Francis to speak for maybe 20 minutes or so. And then afterwards, Matt will come up, and then he'll speak for about 20 minutes. And then following that, there'll be open questions. So please, we always say that we're not here for our sake, we're here for your sake. So think of some questions, write some things down, take notes on your phone, whatever you want to do. And at the end of it all, please ask questions. And then after the question and answer time, there'll be an opportunity for mixing and mingling with them individually. So Francis All was the class of 2011. He majored in political science and minored in economics. Post-graduation, he worked in the D.C. area in a number of law-related offices and was inspired to go to law school and become a lawyer. He did his first year at the University of Pittsburgh Law School before transferring this year to Georgetown University Law Center, one of the top law schools in the nation. He is a member of the Georgetown Journal of Legal Ethics as well. Of interest, this is something off topic of law, but very interesting. Maybe it shows you can do anything with a liberal arts degree. Francis is also an amateur bespoke tailor, which means he makes his own custom suits from hand scratch. So he can give you some ideas about that. So he'll be our first speaker tonight. And then following that, Matt Akers will speak. He graduated with a philosophy major and economics and theology minor in 2003. Overachiever, lots of degrees. He attended Ave Maria School of Law, earned his JD in 2007, after which he clerked for a judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. In 2011, he founded his own law firm called McCarthy & Akers, where he and his colleagues specialize in real estate transactions, wills and estate planning, civil litigation and appeals, and business development and law. So please join me in welcoming Francis up to speak, please. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you to Tom for making this happen. I'm very excited to be here. I remember being in your shoes and trying to listen to a bunch of other people talk about their careers, and I was trying to maintain some interest. And I know you don't know a lot about being a lawyer at your current stage, so I'm happy to come and talk to you because over the years I've mentored a few students here or there and have helped them along the way, but it's great to be able to talk to a number of people at the same time. I'm supposed to talk about applying to law school, how to get into law school, how to be successful in law school, but I just want to preface that by sort of setting a theme that I want to keep in mind as we're talking about this. And that is trying to discern your vocation at all times in your life. We often talk about discerning our vocation, whether we're supposed to be married or single or religious life, but that also applies to our calling, our career. And I think most law students never even consider that. It's largely, most law students consider, what do I want to do? It's very much this individual autonomy sort of idea. But really, as Christians, we're wondering, what is God's will for me? So what I want you to keep in mind as I talk about all these things is this entire process I'm going to describe is a process of discernment. And you should really keep that in mind. to think whether God is calling you to go to law school or to become a lawyer. So with that in mind, just a little bit of more brief background about myself. I do know a little bit about applying to law schools because I sent about, I think I counted it up, I think it was about 25 applications to law schools over the course of 3 years. That is abnormal and unusual, but it was because when I was here at Christendom, I was fairly certain I wanted to be a lawyer and go to law school, but I wanted to take at least a year off and get experience in the legal field, which I did, and 1 year turned into 5 years. And so I kept applying, and I'll come back to that later. But anyway, I wanted to talk first about some things you can do while you're here at Christendom to think about applying to law school and prepare for law school. You're a long way off, and you have no obligations to make that decision yet. But there are some things you can do now if you're considering that to sort of prepare yourself for the future. The first thing I would mention is learn how to think, to write, and to communicate. And you say, yeah, I'm already doing that now. Thank you very much. I'm spending a lot of time on that. But really what you have to understand is, as a lawyer, as a law student, your primary tool are tools of communication and language and making arguments and responding to arguments. And so the more that you can engage in writing persuasively, speaking persuasively, the better. The more you can learn about logical reasoning, the better. I remember sitting in Mr. Brown's Philosophy 101 class and him talking at the beginning of the class and saying, by the end of this course, you know how to make a syllogism. And I thought to myself, I don't even know what a syllogism is. But it turns out to be really important for you to make arguments later on. The second thing that you should be doing now, and you probably already are, is building relationships with your professors. Because I'll talk about in a second, an important part of applying to law school is having letters of recommendation from professors. And so I know you're taking, lots of classes with the same professors because this is a small school, but build those relationships with them. Talk to them outside of the classroom, get to know them, let them get to know you so that you can build those relationships because they're going to be key later. You really do need support from your professors. Also take advantage of trying to see things from different perspectives throughout your time here at Christendom. You probably do a good job of that here. I know the classrooms are pretty open and probably lots of active discussion. But whenever you get to law school, you're often going to be thinking about issues from many different perspectives. And you're going to be in class, like I'm taking a class now about information privacy, in this modern technological age. And there's not much law about information privacy out there to protect your privacy. And so we're constantly asking each other questions about how should we approach this issue? How much do we care about this or about that? How do we turn it into law? And you have to think outside the box. You have to think in ways that maybe you hadn't thought about before. And sometimes the professor will ask you to argue a position you don't agree with. So learn to think from different perspectives and approach things from different perspectives and see them through different lenses, because that's going to help you be a better law student and more dynamic. So those are some of the things you can be doing here at Christendom, and you could be spending time preparing for the LSAT, which is really important. But let me talk a little bit about applying to law schools, which I did a lot of. I think there's a tendency among Christendom students to often apply to grad programs or to go to places that are either comfortable or they know many other Christendom grads have gone to in the past. But I want to encourage you to look very broadly at law schools if you choose to apply, including the top law schools in the nation. I'm at Georgetown, but that's sort of near the bottom of the top law schools. I think Christendom prepares you to go to schools like Yale and Harvard, but that's a very hard place to get in, but I think you should at least consider that and see if that's a possibility for you. All I'm saying is don't self-select yourself out of applying to very prestigious schools, because I know that you're getting the preparation now to succeed. When it comes to applying to law schools, the single most important element of your applications are going to be your LSAT score and your GPA. Those are the most important numbers. Law schools look at those and they put you in a box. Do you meet sort of that range of LSAT scores and GPAs that we want? If so, we're going to look at other factors. Your personal statement, which is very important, sort of a narrative about why you're applying to law school. It's usually really short, 2 pages. And they're going to look at your letters of recommendations from professors, and that's very important because it tells the law school that you're applying to whether you'd be a great student or whether you'd be a jerk. but the LSAT and the GPA are very, very important. And there are websites you can go to and kind of get a sense of the law schools that you're looking at and what ranges they look at as far as those numbers are concerned, but 25 applications later, I learned that the hard way. I applied to Yale and Harvard 4 times, and got rejected every single time because I didn't quite have those numbers. And so, you just have to keep that in mind. You have time over the summer and some more time now than you ever will have. Consider investing in a prep course for the LSAT. I've seen people jump 10 or 13 points in their score. That's phenomenal. That's not probably average, but it's very possible. You can learn the LSAT. It's got sort of a pattern of the same sort of questions and ways of thinking. This is where that syllogism comes in handy. But you can learn it, and you can get a lot better. So, those are the most important elements of your law school application. Work hard to maximize those numbers. That's the best advice I can give to you as far as applying to law schools. And as I mentioned before, apply broadly. Even if you're not quite, you don't think you're the most competitive candidate, give it a shot. You never know what will happen because you'll have other strong factors like your resume and other work experience. That's the other thing you can do while you're at Christendom is try to get internships. Any experience on the resume is going to be very strong. It doesn't have to be law school related or law related. You could be interning on the Hill. That's great experience. You can be doing a number of different things, but show that you're doing extracurricular activities and that you're actively seeking internships to get experience and building your resume. Now, I want to talk for a minute about sort of the path that I took to law school because it's a little different, but it's becoming increasingly more common. A lot of students still go to law school straight from college, but whereas a couple years ago, maybe 70% of law students went straight from college, that's maybe down to 50% now. Many, many students now are taking time off in between college and law school. And I want you to seriously consider that. When I was at Christendom, I was almost certain that I wanted to go to law school, but I took that year off. And I turned it to 5 years, but that was the best decision I ever made for discerning whether or not I wanted to go to law school. I was lucky and ended up as a paralegal and was working in the law, the legal field, and so I got a sense of what was going on and whether or not this is something I wanted to do that you just can't approach from a theoretical perspective. Even if you talk to a lot of people who are lawyers, to get that experience is something entirely different. And I gained a lot of mentors and friends from that. I worked for incredibly accomplished lawyers who helped me along the way. So you not only get an idea about the law, but you have people there who are willing to help you. And all along, you're spending time in prayer and considering, is this what God is calling me to? Because law school is a very expensive proposition. Even if you get a scholarship, you probably still need money to live. And it shocked me how many people came out of law school at the law firm I worked at. It was a very prestigious law firm. They hired from basically only Yale, Harvard, Stanford. And you had these incredibly well-credentialed people who would come, start their job there, and I would have conversations with them, and they would express regret about going to law school. That they just didn't realize they wouldn't enjoy it, and that the work they're doing wasn't enjoyable, and this is not what they wanted. So think about this ahead of time. Getting experience is an important way on that path towards discerning whether or not you want to go to law school. I cannot recommend that highly enough. I was lucky to get my job, and I'm of course happy to talk to you later about ways that you can try to get legal experience, but it is a very eye-opening experience. And really, I can't recommend it enough to you all. I'll offer some general advice about when you get to law school, things to do that will help you succeed. But it is kind of far down the road, and I think you're learning a lot of those tools now that will be very helpful. But find now what your best method for preparing for exams and classes are. I mean, what you do is what you do. What works for you is what works for you. When I got to law school, they said, look, figure out what works for you. Many people do it a different way. Don't listen to them. Do what works for you. So develop your study habits now. But also study in groups when you can. Work with other people now, because you're going to have to work in groups in law school as well. Law school is very, very demanding. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a lot of hard work. But it's very rewarding. But you have to be prepared for that. Something you should consider is that I really don't have time to do much else right now. I have 15 credits and a law journal and another major event I'm helping to plan. You just don't have time for other things. That's why you have to be really sure about this is what I want to do. And as a Christian, I felt called to go to law school, and it's a very, very freeing and liberating feeling and experience because I think this is what God's calling me to do, so you can put all of your passion and energy into that. And I see that even now, a lot of my fellow law students, they're maybe starting to lose their passion, because they're not sure why they went there in the first place, or they don't feel like this is what they currently want. But when you think about it from a vocational perspective, you think, well, this is what God's calling me to do, so I'm going to give it my best. And so, that's something to keep in mind. I was a transfer student. I do want to mention that. I had a chance to go to Georgetown, to start at Georgetown, and I didn't. I went to the University of Pittsburgh. I grew up in Pittsburgh, mostly because, as I mentioned before, law school is a very expensive proposition, and they offered me a very large scholarship, and I took it. So this is something to consider as you're thinking about law schools to apply to, is cost. Georgetown is a very expensive law school to go to. Pitt was less expensive, and I got a scholarship, so it might have been worth it for that reason. The only reason I transferred was because it was limiting me and what I wanted to do. You have to think about sort of what law you might want to do after law school, where you might want to work. These are all factors that will help you decide on where to apply to law school, which will affect what GPA and LSAT you need. But I transferred because Georgetown just gave me incredible opportunities being in DC. I'll be interning in the spring for a judge while I'm still at school. And DC is where I want to work after law school. So you have to give a lot of serious thought up front to where you want to be after law school, what kind of law you want to do, because I worked at a big law firm, very, very large law firm, very, very demanding and intense, but there are smaller law firms, and Matt works at one. There's everything in between. There's working for government. So you need to try to come to some understanding of what you might want to do, and that's why I recommend getting experience in any way that you can. So, as a brief conclusion, I'll just reinforce this idea of a vocation, because it's something that I think you all understand and that most of my peers don't understand. And I think it's an advantage. And I think it's something as Christians we're always trying to discern. This is what God's calling me to. So always keep that in mind. But also, you have an opportunity to sort of answer the call of this school. You're very lucky to be here. And something that has always motivated me when I was deciding what law school to go to and what was the next step for me was this motto, to restore all things in Christ. It drives you, because you have to go to places where Christ isn't in order to restore all things in Christ. I worked for one of the most liberal, progressive law firms in the United States. It was quite an experience. But you need to go out and get these and answer the call to greatness. The last thing I'll mention is not directly related to this, is as Tom mentioned, I do some tailoring, bespoke tailoring, making suits. So if you have questions later, not the Q&A session, but if you want to network later, I'm happy to talk to you about developing your professional wardrobe, because that's very hard. That was a big learning curve. I did not know how to dress when I was here at Christendom, and Tom somewhere probably has pictures of that. I hope they never see the light of day again. But it's a big learning curve, and what you wear says something about you. I like to say it's a language of style, and it shows whether or not you're committed and professional and reliable. And so I've learned a lot, and so I'm willing to share that, because it's hard to know how to dress because you don't have a lot of experience at this point, even though you dress up every day. But with that, I'll conclude. Those are my sort of high-level general remarks. I'm happy to answer questions in more detail, because I could go on for a very long time and in excruciating detail, but I don't want to do that to you now. I will yield to Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. In my line of work, when you get up and speak after such an eloquent speaker, you're expected to offer a rebuttal. But in this case, yeah, I agree with everything you said. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Tom, for putting this together. Our thoughts are with Matt. One thing I do have to mention, just you introduced me, but I noticed that you omitted from my bio that how many times I've gotten you out of prison. Perhaps my most accomplishment that I rely most on here tonight. So I'm speaking on the practice of law. So we'll start with the definition. The practice of law is very just broadly defined as someone who practices giving legal advice to their clients. Ideally paid, not always. So giving legal advice can fall within just general categories. In the American articulation, we generally refer to lawyers as attorneys and counselors of law. So the etymology of attorney is someone who stands in the place of another person, someone who represents another person, who is their agent and their advocate. Someone who's a counselor, someone who offers advice, someone who knows the rules of the game and is willing to aid someone in that. So you see two related ideas that in my practice, and I think you're learning very much how this begins to form the life of an attorney. You act as not just the advocate, as the agent, but also as the counselor. Following from this, when we talk about law, when we talk about the practice of law, we usually have two general types of practice. Now, there are a lot of different ways to stratifications and categories under this, but generally you have transactional and you have litigation. Transactional follows more the role of the counselor, where you don't necessarily appear in court, your interactions and your representation isn't adversarial per se, and where litigation is ultimately, your arena is the courtroom, that or where the rubber meets the road, whenever there's any kind of negotiation that the transactional lawyer engages in, any kind of contract, any type of negotiation mediation, ultimately doesn't mean anything unless you can defend it in court. And so you have the transactional and the litigation. Underneath these two type of areas, and a lot of it follows different personalities. Some are better at the attention to detail and formulation. Others are better at the persuasion and kind of the adversion. Following from this, you have different specialties. I'm sure you're more familiar with it. In undergrad, a lot of folks think about constitutional law. If you've taken Rafe Madden's courses, you think of administrative law. There's criminal law, civil law, maritime law, intellectual property. But generally, your personality, in my experience, your personality and kind of your affinity towards what you're studying determines which type of lawyer you're going to be. But underlying the practice of law and whatever you do, whatever type you have, whatever specialty you have, is ultimately, the legal practice is a universal call to service. The service of your clients, service of your larger community, and service to identify the truth for the sake of justice. We have the unique opportunity to affect the lives of our clients, lives of our community, in a very profound way. You see lawyers everywhere. You see lawyers, sounds like a joke, you see lawyers everywhere. You see them on the political forum, you see them in the courtroom, of course, and you also see them in the C-suites, the executive levels. The legal education you receive, the habits you form, the actual technical skill that you learn, allows you to open so many doors across the wide range of industries and different practices. I found that, law, I remember when I first started my practice, I worked for a firm in D.C., and I remember the attorney telling me about the practice of law, and he's a grizzled attorney for 40 years in the practice, and he said, Matt, more than anything I've learned that law is inherently interesting, and it's inherently challenging. And every day, that's very true. People entrust their lives, when you're a criminal lawyer in particular, if you're an immigration attorney, their livelihoods, when you're a corporate civil attorney, and their happiness. So it's huge stakes, and it's a huge challenge and a privilege to practice law. I think the education at Christendom uniquely prepares you for the pursuit of law, not just the studies. I think academically, I think Francis did a good job articulating the ways in which a liberal arts education, and you hear it again and again, but it's very true, helps you to think, first and foremost, helps you to articulate your thoughts, not just clearly, but persuasively, which is kind of the sine qua non of lawyering in practice. And it also helps you form morally. This notion of Francis expressed to us of it being a vocation, we're all called to God to do something very specific. When you choose the profession of law, it's like other professions, there are unique challenges, but law is. If you remember the scene from Robert Bolt's adaptation of Man for All Seasons, Richie Rich wants a job, a legal job, and because he's tempted, Thomas More says, become a teacher. There are famous maxims of of lawyers telling young, ambitious individuals that if you can't be moral, if you struggle with your own character, don't submit yourself to the unique temptations and struggles that lawyers have because of the high stakes that you deal in and the temptations that you might experience. And so I think in your time at Christendom, you develop those habits, you develop that academic excellence, you develop the moral foundation, you form your character, and then last, you use the resources that we have. I think the school has done a great job. When I graduated from Christendom, I think I knew of one attorney. Now there are probably upwards of 30, 40 that I know of. So these resources are available to you. We're the community of alumni. You can always reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help you in any way. And last, as you're trying to choose, your vocation, you're praying for it. I think it's important that we know that you students pray for us alumni. In turn, we'll pray for you. That we find whatever God intends for us, and we follow it through and through.